Welcome, everybody, to our Community of Learning series, Strengthening Wellness in Indigenous Communities Using the Medicine Wheel. We are delighted to have you here today for the first of 3 informative sessions, Utilizing Culture in Grant Writing. Today is the first session of the series, and this session is dedicated to exploring the powerful intersection of culture, grant writing, and programming. In this webinar, you will gain valuable insights into several key areas, which we'll learn more about shortly. We are also so fortunate to have an amazing speaker with us here today, Shane Lopez-Johnston from Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest. But before we begin this session, I would like to introduce our team helping us from NCUE today and share some housekeeping items. My name is Liz Best, and I'm a Program Manager of Technical Assistance with the Technical Assistance Research Center, known as TARC. Joining me from the NCUE team are Molly Siegel, Public Health Associate. She'll be dropping things into the chat throughout this session, and Jessica Gilbertson. She is our Director of Communications, Events, and Community Engagement, and she'll be running our slides on all things communication. We are honored to have you all here today, and we kindly ask that you place your name, your organization, and your tribal affiliation into the chat box. In addition, we welcome any feedback you would like to provide your webinar experience in our survey, which Molly will also drop in the chat box. We'll save our questions till the end, and we'll have a formal Q&A for the last 5 or 10 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with NCUE, here's a little background. The National Council of Urban Indian Health, also known as NCUE, is the national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent health and public health services for American Indian and Alaska Natives living in urban areas. NCUE is the only national representative of the 41 Title V Urban Indian Organizations, or UIOs, under the Indian Health Service and the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. NCUE strives to improve the health of over 70% of the American Indian Alaska Native population that lives in urban areas, supported by quality, accessible healthcare centers. Next slide, please. Today's event is made possible by the Indian Health Services. However, this event is solely the responsibility of the National Council of Urban Indian Health and does not necessarily represent the views of Indian Health Services or the Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. Before we proceed, please note that this, this session is being recorded for educational and quality improvement purposes. The recording will also be shared out after this session to make it accessible to those who may have missed it or would like to revisit the content at a later date. Next slide, please. Please note that your mics have been muted upon entry. We always encourage participation and engagement in today's session, and we invite all the participants to turn on your camera and post questions and comments in the chat. As I said, there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. And as we continue our webinar, we encourage active participation. To make the most of this interactive experience, here is how you can ask a question on Zoom. Just click on the chat icon, type your question, and hit enter into the group. Next slide, please. And without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Shane, who will share with us his insights and experiences using culture in grant writing and programming.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Shut Shanila, Kwei Onshum, Shane Lopez-Johnston, Tolowa Dini Nation. My name is Shane Lopez-Johnston. Good afternoon, everyone. I work at the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest, Inc. I'm the Director of Prevention there. I've been with NARA for over 13 years. And I worked in Indian country for just about over 21 or 22 years. The kind of ongoing joke is when I started, I used to have hair on my head and not on my face, and that has drastically changed and different coloring. I have twins that are 3.5, so I grow a gray hair every day. But I'm very excited to be here today. I think grant writing for urban Indian organizations is really important. And so today is very much kind of a 101. If you are a veteran at grant writing, congratulations. It's not easy to become that. So my hat's off to you. If you're kind of in between in the beginning and middle, you'll get maybe a few things out of this. And if you're new to this game, this will be really beneficial. We'll go over a lot of different things today, kind of wide ranging. Normally on a kind of conference style, I'd like to be able to do interactive, but because of the setup and the content, it really works best for afterwards. So as I'm talking and you hear something like, ooh, I want to have a follow-up on that, make sure you write it down or put it in the chat box to be able to be monitored. So again, thank you. Next slide, please. Sorry. So here is our agenda. I think people that work in Indian country know that agendas are pretty free and loose. These are the areas in which we'll talk about, but I'm sure we'll jump around. It'll be a very circular style conversation of me talking about stuff today. But out of this, you'll gain a little bit of understanding towards the medicine wheel, not its concepts, but just the premise of how it works within kind of grant writing and being able to utilize it as a strategy, gain basic understanding of strategies in grant writing for urban Indian organizations. And then, of course, gaining basic understanding of strategic planning, establishing a scope and goals for grant funding, and then learning best practice tools for grant reporting, data tracking, evaluation, and grant budgeting. Everybody's favorite, right? Those are the fun topics. Gaining basic understanding of utilizing community advisory and elder culture keepers and incorporating traditional, teachings into your services. So go ahead, next slide. So this is a little introduction. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. Basically, it says, I've worked in urban Indian country for a long time. I'm an urban Indian myself. I've never lived on my rancheria. The Tolowa Nation is located in Smith River, California, right on the coast, right over Brookings, Oregon, where the redwoods grow big and tall. My grandma was on tribal council before we were, recognized. And then afterwards, for a number of years, my mom works in has just retired from the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. My dad worked in Bonneville Power Administration doing fish rights for the tribes as a non-native. My sister works there also doing stuff at Bonneville. So our tribes really, our families really kind of committed to our tribal people all over. So next slide. That slide does talk a little bit about some of the grants that I oversee currently. It was for a suicide prevention conference that we had just the other week. And I thought, hey, I'll leave all the suicide prevention stuff in there so they can see all of those funding streams that we have. Currently, the youth prevention program that I oversee has 14 different funding streams. So between those 14 different funding streams, we have a level of 3 that we kind of look at majority-wise: state, tribal, and federal. And so I'll talk a little bit about those as it goes on. This first kind of topic that we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the medicine wheel, and then I'm going to allow Nakui to jump in if they want to add anything. So next slide, please. So we all know, well, I should say most people know kind of the medicine wheel teachings. They know the 4 directions. We talk about the 4 seasons. We talk about the circle, the balance, right? Those are all really important. But if you're somebody that's new to grant writing and you're looking to incorporate things that maybe are further teachings than you have, I would say always recommended looking into somebody in your community that has those teachings, that medicine, and those stories. So a lot of people think that there's 4 colors, right? That we have, the 4 directions and what that means. There's actually a lot of different meanings, and there's more than 4 colors in some tribes, and different ways in which they point and what they represent for the lifespan. So these are all small things, but very important to know if you're going to be doing a teaching around these, to be able to get it right for your tribal surroundings, which can be a little bit more difficult. As an urban Indian organization, you may serve a vast amount of tribes, right? So deciding on maybe which ones you want to be able to focus on as your core kind of focus is really important. I also recommend, doing a little research around if the medicine wheel is an appropriate concept to use. I want to preference this by saying not everything works for everybody, right? The cookie cutter approach isn't always the best approach, but you can get different, I think, ideas from your tribal communities that you serve. Making sure that you have these lessons is really important. You don't want to go in and do more harm culturally and then have to go back and backtrack. And really, it does damage for your relationship with the tribes if you haven't done something that's culturally responsive and culturally appropriate to what's surrounding you. Instilling the concept of balance through the medicine wheel teaching. We did a series called Walking in Balance. And what we tried to do was focus on each quadrant for mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical. And we tried to give a presentation around each of those areas to allow people to kind of see the different strategies that you can draw from when you're trying to become healthier, have more well-variety within your life. These can be viewed online at times as well. So if you have any more interest in that, you can always let them know in the chat and I'll be able to forward that. At this time, I will allow Nakui if they have any further concepts they'd like to expand on in this area.
No, I think you captured it perfectly, Shane. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. And again, I want to preference this, guys. Like, this is not end all say all. These are just suggestions that have worked in the past. The medicine wheel is a unique concept to the Indigenous people, to Native people, right? And so anytime you can become more unique within your grant writing and your proposal, it makes you stand out. It makes you look as if something is alluring, right, to your program. So anytime you can utilize, and you'll hear me say this a lot, culture is prevention in your messaging, it really goes a long way. How do you instill more teachings within your programming to be able to show that you're going to make a difference in your community through the cultural concept that you guys are implementing? So topic 2, basic understanding of strategies in grant writing as an urban Indian program. Next slide, please. So I know it sounds silly, but where do you stand, right? How are you selecting your grant? What are you trying to accomplish within your grant? Are you trying to are you a 1-person program and you're trying to make yourself a 3-person program? Are you trying to expand infrastructure in which you already have created, and maybe you're looking to instill maybe some more sustainability through curriculum, or maybe additional supports through your staff around training and different things? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? So your first goal you want to ask yourself is what are you trying to accomplish with that? That will allow you to kind of look at maybe what grant might fit you. So what type of grant are you applying for? There's 3 different ones that I kind of say are the main ones, and they're levels. Basically, you have the federal level, the state level, and then you have your tribal levels, and they kind of fall in between on different requests that they offer. So federal programs oftentimes have a very scientific look behind what they're trying to do. They're oftentimes trying to change health in some sort of way. They're looking for cultural and traditional ways to explain their model. When you're looking at the state, a lot of the state funding is around partnerships with your counties, right? Partnerships with the state itself around improving systems of care, communication, and relationship building between you guys. A lot of our tribes have a lot of resentment still towards state and county kind of people, just based off of history and trauma, right? And so identifying that those relationships might be somewhere that you need to rebuild would be a good idea to look at some of that state funding. And then, of course, we have our tribal funding. And tribal funding, oftentimes, we don't have to explain why culture is prevention, right? We don't have to explain the medicine wheel concept. So applying for those grants as an urban Indian organization might give you a leg up to feel more confident in explaining, this is why my program is going to be successful with your funding. So allowing yourself to identify kind of what level of grant you want. There's also state contracts. There's, there's casinos that have small grants and different things. One of the things I touch on later, but I do want to mention now, is the size of the grant doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be less or more work. I've had grants that were $10,000 that were just as hard to do as $100,000 and $1 million. The work doesn't necessarily change. You're still required to document and report and making sure that you're meeting your outcomes. So if you're thinking in it that way, if you're a smaller organization, writing for a smaller grant might give you more opportunity to apply more often, give yourself more experience before writing for a larger grant. Sometimes it becomes more difficult if you're a 1-person show. And I get that. In Indian country, oftentimes we wear many hats, right? We're not just the grant implementer. We're also the youth, person, and we also do suicide prevention and tobacco. So I understand that it can be a little drastic sometimes. And so those smaller grants might allow you to have more success. Here's the things you always want to check out right off the bat. Eligibility, okay? Oftentimes on the front page, it'll tell you right there, urban Indian organizations, tribal affiliates, tribes, counties, whatever. You don't want to get onto page 40 of the jargon that comes as a grant and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been reading this whole thing and I don't even qualify for this. So eligibility, very important to know. Most of the time that's told right on the first page, okay? The total awardees. If this grant is for $5 million and you're like, wow, this is really great, we could do so much with it, but they're only awarding 2 people and there's going to be, hundreds of people that apply, is it worth your time? Is your organization at a far enough point within their establishment to be able to write for these grants at that level? So make sure you look at the awardees. If it's $1 million and they're going to fund 10 people and they're urban Indian programs only, well, there's only a handful of urban Indian organizations within your area. Maybe that's a great one to apply for. Total amount of funding, okay? Oftentimes we look at this and we say, well, this looks like a lot of money, right? $100,000. But then you put one person under there, their FTE takes up almost 80% of it. And you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I only have, $20,000 to really work with. So knowing the total amount, really important. And then the duration, right? Is it a 1-year grant? Is it a 3-year grant? Is it a 5-year grant? All of that allows you to put, I think, intermediate, long-term goals into place when you're talking about your stuff. One of the newer things that I've noticed with the SAMHSA grants is they're requiring FTE under certain positions. FTE is basically pay for a person that you put under your grant. At 0.5 is what they're asking for some director positions. My time is split as a director between like 8 funding streams. So if I was to take 0.5 and put it under that, I would have to probably go off 4 of those other funding streams, and meet that requirement. So that means that grant is requiring you to be on there at least 0.5. That's your pay, your wage, and your fringe. So, and then your time that you designate to that program. And then, of course, are there mandatory requirements? For example, is it a youth focus? Is it veterans? Is it Two-Spirit? And then one of the things I kind of put in here as like a little highlight as well, letters of commitment and letters of support. Oftentimes nowadays they ask for letters of support. Letters of support are people saying, we support the efforts of your program for X, Y, and Z grant and look forward to seeing how they can help the community. Letters of commitment are them committing to something within the grant. We commit to providing 1 culture night every month going forward for the duration of the grant. Our partnership with NAR Northwest has been long going, and we're excited to continue that through these cultural experiences, right? So make sure you're reading what are the requirements of that. All right, next slide, please. So what's your role in the grant? Are you the lead person in this? Are you in a supporting role, right? If you're the lead, do you have everything you need to write this grant? Do you know everything about the community? Do you know everything about your resources that you have available? Do you know all of the evaluation tools you're going to use? Do you know how to do a budget, right? It becomes a much larger kind of component than just writing a successful grant. If you're playing the support role, what areas can you help in? So let's say you do have a grant writer at your program and they come to you and they say, Shane, we're writing this grant for the youth program. What can you help us in here? And I say, well, I can help us with implementing this grant on several different areas. I can do youth prevention. I can do re-engagement for education and tobacco. And they go, great. Can you help us come up with some goals and objectives? And I say, yes. So then I'm part of that process, right? Do you know enough about the program that you're writing for, or do you need others to help define? If you're new to a program and you're writing the grant, you want to ask as many people that are around you, what was working before? What can you do to make things better, right? Familiarize yourself with the past programming. Allow yourself to review job descriptions. Do they need to be changed? Like a lot of this stuff that we talk about, it's common sense, but it's a lot. And that's why I like hearing things like this. It becomes a little bit more refreshing. You're like, oh, it's not as overwhelming. These are just steps I need to take, right? Utilize the staff to help you navigate areas you might not know. Do not be afraid to ask for help and to ask questions when you don't know certain systems in place. People move jobs all the time. It's not unfamiliar to have to ask for help, so don't feel ashamed to do it. Do you know the community you're working in? A lot of us, like myself, or it might be an urban Indian transplant that's moved, right? Maybe we're not from the area that we're serving. Maybe it's something that we're coming into new because our family, our kids moved to a different school or whatever, okay? Allow yourself to familiarize within your community, okay? You need to be in your community, you need to be seen, and you need to be a part of it. One of the things that NACUI helped NAR with, and I always recommend, is a community readiness assessment, right? What is your community ready for? So you don't want to write a grant for something that your community isn't even going to utilize. You want to make sure you have the voice of those that you're going to help. Are you familiar with each area that's required for the grant application? Okay, implementation, right? After you write this grant is going to be number one. How are you getting off the boards? You know, what do you need to be successful when you're implementing this program? Budgets. Who's doing your budget? When you're doing your budget and you're looking at it, do you look at a budget and all you see is numbers and it looks like the matrix? Well, then you should probably get some help. I can look at a budget now and I will tell everybody I struggled in school. I have a bachelor's. Yes, I went to school to play baseball and I never thought I'd be writing papers and working with numbers my whole life. And here I am 20 plus years later. So if I can do it, everybody can learn to do it, but it is a learned trait. So if you're learning how to look at a budget and you see that it's $250,000 and you want to hire 2 staff and you have different things on there, you're going to be looking at your budget getting dropped down by FTE. You're going to be looking at it get dropped down by fringe. You're going to have an indirect, right? Most urban Indian organizations have an indirect. I think NARS is currently almost at 25. We find ourselves getting these chunks just kind of slowly taken out. Rent, B&O, you know, all of these things really play a role. Do you have to buy computers? Do you need phones for your work? Are you going to have travel that you're required to do? So allow yourself to look at the budget, but then also know what you're going to need. And then evaluation, right? How do we evaluate our programs? I know evaluation is sometimes a dirty word in tribal communities because of past trauma, right? We really had people take advantage of tribal communities and made us look really horrible in some lights. And we're still kind of recovering or taking our time to build trust to be able to do that. So find a native evaluator or find an evaluator that maybe has worked with the tribes, or if you're lucky enough to have an internal evaluator, you know, include them in this process. If you are your own evaluator, you're going to have to set up some stuff to be successful, and that'll look a little bit different down the road. Okay, next slide. So topic 3, gaining basic understanding of strategic planning to establish scope and goals for your grant funding. Go ahead, next slide. So the scope of work, you want to have a well-defined scope of work, right? Work plan and timeline. And what are the difference between the 3? A scope of work is basically the defining piece of your grant. That's kind of saying what you're looking to accomplish as a whole for your grant. The work plan kind of gives the description of how you're going to accomplish those goals. So oftentimes it looks like maybe some of your outcomes and measurements and stuff. And then the timeline is how you're going to accomplish that during the time of the grant. Do you have short-term, intermediate, and long-term? Okay. Making your goals obtainable, right? Include people that know realistic numbers. Don't say that you're going to meet with 100 kids if you don't know what the program did the year before and you're new to the area. And they said, we met with 25 last year and that was the most we've ever had, right? So make sure that you're talking with people that know that. Set short-term, long-term, and or intermediate and long-term goals up. I put on here, take advantage of low-hanging fruit, meaning if you have something you know you can obtain, if you know that your program already sees this amount of people and you're looking for further funding, then write that in. You don't have to come up with another strategy at that point in time. Find ways to sustain what's currently working, okay? Culture is prevention. Implementing culture into your programs creates a unique setting that funders could find enticing. I talked about this earlier. There's a cultural component that we all have that allows us to draw from things that the normal population can't. Our population is unique. We have been here longer. We are still here. We have endured. We have ancestral ties that go back onto this sacred land of ours to be able to tell these stories going forward. Find them, take advantage of what you feel comfortable with. Do not share things that you don't feel are appropriate. Just because it's cultural doesn't mean it necessarily needs to be put on paper. There are some things that are sacred that need to be addressed with you guys in ceremony only. Please recognize that those things are important to have, right? We use our culture keepers, our elders, to help be a part of our grant process. We always encourage them to be a part. Sometimes it's harder in the urban Indian population to find maybe somebody like that compared to on a reservation. So I understand that maybe that's not a resource you have available, but I always encourage, always include our elders, right? Okay. The National Evidence-Based Practice, NREP, is no longer there. So I guess you could look for it, but it basically defines some of our promising practice and evidence-based practice that grant and funders really like to see. Tribal-based practices are something that are unique to the state of Oregon. We are the only state in the United States that is in legislation that anytime you talk about evidence-based practice, you also have to refer to tribal-based practices. We have 20 that have been approved currently and are working on 5 more. If you guys are interested in what that looks like, please feel free to let that know in the chat, and I will follow up with you with Caroline Cruz and Dr. John Spence and some of our other team that we sit on. So next slide, please. Okay, 4 topics. Our topic 4, learn best practices and tools for grant reporting, data tracking, evaluation, and grant budgeting. Next slide. So what's the reporting process? And I always ask this because do you know what you're stepping into for a workload is basically what this is saying. What does the reporting process look like? Is it an annual report? Is it a semi-annual report? Do you have monthly Zoom calls, right? Are you the one that's, is there a reporting template? Or are you just using something? And then always kind of this new piece, and it's not new, it's been around for a long time, but there's these portals that you enter stuff into. Are you familiar with the portal, or are you going to have to learn what that looks like? Are you going to have to secure a password and register and making sure that people are a part of that whole thing that are going to be turning in your reports? NARA is lucky. When I started 13 years ago, we did everything ourselves. So we did the grant writing, we did the implementing, we did the reporting, and we had a little help with evaluating from an external evaluator, but we had to have all of that stuff kind of managed. So using the portal was really important to know how to do. Most of the time in our smaller tribal communities or urban Indian organizations where you, again, are maybe the one, you're the one pony show, this will be really, really important for you, your supervisor, and someone like your CFF or your chief finance officer or somebody along those lines. Communication, okay? I say this with a laughter because we've been on the wrong end of communication. All of us have, right? It's just sometimes you think it's flowing one way and the person that's receiving it doesn't hear it the same way. Communication is really important in grants. You don't want to miss something because you didn't have proper communication with maybe who's supposed to be helping out with each situation. So who's receiving the emails from the funders? Is it just you, right? Is it you and somebody else? And then you guys need to be the person that then forwards that on to your team, to another player, to a tribal organization, to a tribe itself. Some of the grants we write for the tribes, right? And there are sub-grantees. And then we have to communicate with each one of them, right? So making sure that that information reaches the appropriate people. I put on here kind of people that we have, our CEO, grants manager, program director, right? Those are kind of just standard ones. Who's the key personnel that should receive this communication, right? Really identify what that looks like for your organization. Each organization is different, okay? Who do you need, or do you need to add someone like evaluation after you've done it for a few months and you realize, shoot, you know what? We keep noticing that there's a snag here, or, this person isn't responding to this and I just noticed they're not on the email thread, right? Go ahead, add them, make sure that that's being done. That's just kind of a dip into that. This next one will go into a little bit more. So next page. So how are you planning on evaluating your program? Do you have an internal evaluator? Okay, that's the first one. If you don't have an internal evaluator, do you need to hire one? And if your organization is pretty firm that they're not going to provide an evaluator for it, is there an external person that the tribes have used that you guys trust to be able to use going forward? If you're doing your own evaluation, I'm sorry. And also I feel like you probably are really good with numbers and you probably have a decent handle on stuff. But if you're like, yes, I'm doing my own evaluating and no, I don't have any of those things you just said, Shane, I highly recommend going to look at evaluation tools. They are out there. They're available. They cost a small amount of money, but they really help. When you're trying to provide reports, you can draw data out. They produce really high quality graphs and pictures and different things, and you can keep track of it as you go about We use Smartsheet with my program. It allows other people to kind of look into our system. We have each grant lined out. We click on it, we add the activity in. You can actually even do it from your phone if you're out, doing like equine therapy. You can put in, we had 6 kids today. We had a tribal elder that came out and we talked about horse medicine. And you can send that in and it'll go automatic into your Smartsheet. So creating measurables that are trackable by your evaluation team. Make sure if you have an evaluation team that you ask them, hey, do these look like good outcomes and goals? Do these look like we can measure these? If not, I would say make sure that you're doing SMART goals, which are online as well. And I can't remember the acronym, so don't ask me. But I highly recommend. They allow you to, I think, be more realistic about what you're looking at. If you are, again, one man or woman show, create a system that'll meet your grant evaluation expectations, okay? Excel, everybody knows Excel. Now, not everybody is well-versed in Excel, but guess what? You can take a class online, right? They have beginner level classes, and they'll teach you how to create, coding and formulas so that when you put in numbers, let's say you're just tracking participation, right? That's one of your grant outcomes. We want to meet at least 150 people that we have that participated in our program. Excel can count that for you. So you don't have to go through and try to count, all the little numbers going down after a year. So allow yourself to not have as much work at the end. I always put this on here. Don't put this off until the end, because I have before in my time, and it's a lot of work to track down stuff. And guess what? My brain just doesn't work like it used to. The older I get, I feel like the more things come in and slip out. So don't give yourself this headache, okay? Try to get on this early. And again, if you have somebody that's internal, please include them in your grant writing process the entire time. Okay, next slide. So utilizing the community and elders and culture keepers. So the reason I call them culture keepers is NARA itself has a culture keeper group. And what they help do is they help provide basically a native lens to everything that we do as an organization. So when we get funding through SAMHSA, we look at that funding through this native lens and ask, how do we indigenize the core concepts without affecting the fidelity of our program, right? How do we look at creating sustainability through cultural representation and cultural strategies? So we utilize elders and culture keepers all the time. I think it's one of the things as an urban Indian program and organization that needs to be a constant. It should be something that allows you not only support, but to be able to draw information when you have questions and allow a different view, right? Like that's the thing, is you want people to be on your team that give a different view to your implementation of your programming. So often success of your grant is based on community buy-in for your programming. So include them in the planning process, right? We talk about this with youth all the time. If you're doing a program for youth, have a youth at the table, right? Like invite your veterans to the table, invite your Two-Spirit, invite your community members, your elders. So I put community readiness assessment in here, another feather in the cap for NCUI because they helped us do this. Do you need to do another one? These community readiness assessments are actually really great because they help you identify where your gaps of service are, right? Where you're able to actually provide something. Do you have enough resources in a certain area to obtain the goal that you're trying to? So a community readiness assessment, can be done fairly easy. You can interview 20 different people from your community in different walks of life, and even programming yourself and stuff. And then you ask them a number of questions that get evaluated. So NCUI is very helpful with this. I also think if you were to look up other templates that have been used, if you want, NARA, I myself would be more than willing to share you our process. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to put that in the chat. Okay. If you're working in your community, then you need to get out in your community. Okay. That's it. Be active, be present, and be visible, right? Are you attending local events? Are you going to sporting events? Are you going to ceremony? Are you going to different things? Bingo night, right? Like A familiar face goes a long way when you're working with the tribal community. If you're from your tribal community, then you already are in your tribal community. You get it. You see outsiders when they come in and you're like, oh, look at this person. What do they think they're going to do? Right. And so it takes time and commitment to create trust in tribal communities. Okay. So take the time and put it into there. Allow yourself, I think, to be humble, to be and learn, right? Learn from the community. So different ways you can do this. Support your local businesses. If you're buying swag, so sweatshirts, hoodies, hats, different things like that, buy from a local provider. If you got a tribal person that does prints, use them as printing. Media, okay? Media is a huge component nowadays. One picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Like, well, what's a video worth then? So creating opportunity for you to have more visual effect from your grant into the community and your grant funding, really, really important. Identify key stakeholders. What's a key stakeholder? Well, that's somebody in your community that's a mover and shaker, right? Do you got a teacher, tribal teacher that's been there for 30 years and she knows, everybody from up, for the last 3 generations and this and that, you include them. Has she had not only auntie, uncle, and mom and dad and brother, sister in her class? Like, use her as somebody that you can include in your planning process. Okay. I know law enforcement is kind of an iffy subject. Tribal police, though, the local food vendor, or like sales, corner store, include them in what's going on. Are you trying to create a community support network system that's a voice for your program. So you don't have to go and be the one that's knocking on all the doors saying, hey, this is my program. They're taking that out and they're like, hey, have you heard this new program that's going to be implemented? They actually have, these upcoming culture nights, or they have these upcoming events that they're going to be doing. So utilize that. Include the elders to help provide Native American lens in your programming and implementation. Just do it if you have it, right? If you have this as an opportunity, I highly recommend it. I put it in here several times because it's that important to have. Invite them to the table from the beginning. This was supposed to be a little indented bullet point because elders often feel left out and they feel like you only come to them when you need them. And we need to utilize them from the get-go. They are not an afterthought, right? Our elders are most important for us to be able to pass on to the 7 generations, right? They're our teachers to be able to pass those teachings on through us and down the line. Invite them to the table from the beginning. Honor them. Do it in a good way. Ask them to come and gift them a blanket, maybe not a Pendleton blanket, but maybe like a nice, lap blanket, fuzzy lap blanket, or a sweatshirt, and then feed them and talk with them about how they feel about, the concepts that you're thinking about writing. Understand the history between your organization and the tribes. I feel like people forget that nothing is perfect and things in the past definitely were nowhere close to that. And so allowing yourself to be realistic about maybe what needs to be done around grieving or like a talking circle or a letting go ceremony, allowing yourself to be a part of that process. Not every organization is going to have the same thing, but there is just bad blood that's happened, and that needs to be addressed before you move forward. So you need to be able to take that in a good way. Again, elders are a really big help in that. Allowing yourself to have a healing space and medicine to be able to provide, that cultural washing of yourself if you need to, but also just a place where you can share honestly to begin from anew. Okay, next slide. So recommendations. So these are recommendations that I highly recommend. Community engagement, cultural connection. If you're writing a grant trying to utilize culture, please use the culture that you have available. Don't try to reach out to somebody else for something that you can't provide in your community, right? Being an urban Indian program, I know NARA sees over 255 different bands, clans, and tribes in a year. There's not one way to do something, but our culture providers that came to start NARA 55 years plus years ago were Lakota. So a lot of our names, our buildings are like Oyate, right? And different things like that. So our teachings can vary. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, that's not the way we do it, I think the cultural response is like, oh man, I wish you could show me how you do some of yours, right? Or I'd love to be able to include your teachings. What does that look like? So knowing as an urban Indian program, there's no one right way to do stuff. You can only do stuff that you were taught, right? As a teacher of my culture, I have more teachings that are urban than I do of my own tribe. So share what you can and be honest about what you have available. If you don't have it in your community, then you need to look to be able to provide something you do have in your community. Don't compete with the tribes, okay? As urban Indian organizations, we are not a tribe. We are here to support tribes, and we're here to help them accomplish anything that they can to make them more, to allow them to be successful in their tribal communities. Does that look like funding and maybe technical assistance or something? Great. If they're writing for the same grant, okay, you call and you can ask, are you guys writing for this grant? And they say, no, but can we be involved in your grant? You know, or yes, we are writing for this grant. Then you need to go back to your organization and say, hey, our tribe over here is writing for this, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to be in competition. Utilize low-hanging fruit. I said it once, I'm gonna say it again. Take advantage of what you have in front of you, okay? If you know you have a really great youth program and they've got a youth council that's really incredible, then utilize the youth council. Okay, put them into something, give them some funding, allow yourself to report on a success that you know you're going to have. Play to your strengths, okay? If you have a person in your team that's like a really great beater, then utilize it. Like put them in and say you're going to do beating classes. Like take advantage of what your strengths are. Do you have a great grant writer, right? Then take advantage of your great grant writer. Do you have somebody who's youthful and really likes to go out and play sports with the kids, write in some type of, you know, nutritional fitness aspect, right? Use buzzwords and language that the grant has. Every grant that you write has these indicators in them. Sometimes you'll hear them talk about, I don't know, like the 6 CSAP strategies. And you're like, ooh, okay. And maybe you're not familiar with that. Write it down, Google it. What's the 6 CSAP strategies? Let me go check this out, right? Allow yourself to utilize what they're giving you already. If they're giving you those buzzwords, then take them and write them in with your grant proposal. Use media and social media. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I can't say it enough. When you have something joyful or culturally healing that's been allowed to be captured by media and approved, you know, to be able to take those pictures during that time and you can share them, share them. Grant funders love to see these pictures. They love to see their money at work. Also, it's not that hard nowadays, right? We walk around with a personal, you know, camera in our pocket. So you can pull that out, take advantage of that. If you're going to do that, please recommend you have release forms. There's always steps in place. You can ask for these maybe even after the events happen. So don't share them at that time. Ask the participants to be able to sign a document. I put this in bold because it's the most important part of this entire presentation, and it's follow the template. If the template says to write in font 18, italic, and underlined, then guess what? You're writing in 18 font, italic, and underlined. And it is not a joke. They will tell you exactly what they expect. And if you do not fill out that section to their exact description, they will not look at your grant any further past that, or you'll get marked down points. And anytime you get marked maybe for a 0 in any section, the chance of you being funded is really, really hard. Give yourself plenty of time, okay? They forecast grants out almost a year in advance. I saw SAMHSA is going to be doing their Gary Lee Smith grant, which is suicide prevention. NARA had that for a long time. It's out for 2024. We have it on our calendar. Sometimes we see stuff late. I get it. The grants come out and you're like, oh, shoot, it's due next week. Can we do it? You might be able to do it. It'll be a lot more work. Just give yourself more time. Proofread, okay? Have others proofread. Sometimes when you read through your same stuff, you read your mistakes in your head as being correct. Allow proofreading. You do get marked down points, right? So proofread, and then start to learn some of the lingo. So, you know, people throw around acronyms all the time. I just put a few up here for stuff. Just familiarize yourself. It'll make you a little bit just more educated on the topic itself. When you're reading through stuff, you'll be able to kind of transfer stuff faster. Use as much culture as you can. I can't express it enough. It's the point of the kind of training today, but culture is prevention and it's huge. And then don't recreate the wheel. Okay. If you have a grant that you wrote that was successful, take the pieces from there that fit. So a lot of time when we're talking about demographics, that's like the very first question. If you are an urban Indian program and it doesn't change, you can just take that and use it again. So allow yourself to do that. And then I did put two things down, and I know we're right here at the end, and I do want to just, because they are important, what I say, you can learn as much from a denied grant, from a grant that you didn't get, than as you can with one that you did. So go through, read the sections that you didn't score high on, and come up with ways to be able to raise that up, to be able to meet the need that they said they're looking for. So allow yourself to learn from your mistakes. And then always attend all grant webinars, Zooms, anything they have before it where they're talking about what they're looking for, the pre kind of grant writing process, attend those. Okay, with that, I think last slide. With these tips and tricks, you'll be well on your way to writing grants and securing funding from your program. As with anything, the more you do, the better you get. So thank you guys. I'm assuming there's questions. So I will go ahead and wait for the next process.
Great. Thanks, Shane. Thanks for sharing your story and your journey with grants. I think there's just so much energy, and I can see it in the chat already with a bunch of questions. So we'll address those. And then once we do that, I'll invite people to come off of mute if they have any questions. I know there was a lot of chatter about evaluations and the evaluation process. And how do you measure, spirituality and culture, or these other, I guess, indicators that might not be able to be measured so qualitatively? Can you share a little bit about your experience or tools that you've used that have worked?
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting a measurable tool is really important. We have evaluators, but when the beginning of my time and we didn't, it's like we can't sit in a sweat lodge with a checklist of what we're accomplishing while we're in ceremony, right? You can't expect elders to fill out, reports after these. So we ran into this. The biggest thing that we decided was showing the difference of knowledge that was gained. So if you go into it and you say, and you do a question that says, did you feel more connected to your culture during this time of this activity? And you can do a Likert scale if you want. So 1 through 10, or strongly agree, disagree. You can do stuff. You can do yes, no if you want. The other thing that we kind of asked was, because we do recovery a lot of the time, is did you feel like these cultural activities made you want to remain sober or continue your sobriety or go into your sobriety? So those questions for us, I think basically my answer is developing really important questions that don't ask specifically about the activity that's being provided, but the outcome of your mental, spiritual, emotional, or physical presence after that activity is done, if that helps. And I do have examples. If people are like, can you help us? Can you provide some evaluation questions? I'd be happy to send you some of ours that we use for some of our other grants. Absolutely.
Great, thanks. I do know there was a question on fringe benefits, but I think that was answered in the chat. But I invite people to put other questions in, or please come off of mute. We still have about 7-8 minutes for some discussion. Yeah, a lot of people would like examples of questions, so I'll gather some and send those out with the recording and the slides.
Great.
Hi, this is Glenda Tovar. I know the session's being recorded. Can we get a copy of the recording? Because some of my colleagues are not available to see this presentation.
Yeah, certainly. That it will be emailed out next week. The recording follow up with some resources as well. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Glenda, if you guys have more intimate questions and you want to do a Zoom call with me and my grant writing staff, I'd be more than happy to to schedule something as well. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, I had a question about, we talked about utilizing elders and their knowledge and experience. So I was hoping you could go in a little bit. So our Urban Indian organization is about 3 to 5 hours from any tribal land reservation, tribal epicenter. And so we struggle a lot with having accurate representation for elders and youth. And we're currently trying to build a youth program. So what would you say is the best way to go about if we don't have, I guess, necessary access to elders or youth right now?
Yeah, so I think this model right here that we're using today is definitely one that I recommend. I think Zoom has allowed us to travel great distances without being, in the same communities. Do I think that it has the same power as sitting in a room with our elders and culture keepers? Absolutely not. But I do think it's a tool that you can use. So we have some very influential people in Indian country that have done a lot. And to be able to have them, talk to the community through Zoom is one. I would say if you're a couple hours away, I'd probably start doing site visits is what I call them. And, I just put them in to be able to get out whatever is a realistic amount for your organization. I like to do it quarterly. And that way you can go out and you can set it around maybe any cultural events that might be going on at that time. And you spend time in the community and you sit down and you offer, and I know it sounds weird to offer stuff for culture, but you offer some incentives for people to come and talk with you about, these are things that I'm not seeing in my community. The things that I notice when we talk with elders is they're very observant about stuff that they would like to see, right? That they maybe used to see during their time that isn't here anymore, or areas that they would like to help in. And they kind of go down that, allow us, that would be my recommendations for youth. For youth stuff, I would say creating something that can get them together. So we do a 9 tribes and NARA prevention camp once a year. And it allows for all the tribes to send, up to 6 to 10 teenage youth, and we do culture and prevention. So maybe we'll do moccasin making, and then we'll do traditional foods, and then we'll do like suicide prevention QPR training for them. And then we'll go into lunch and we'll do beadwork, and then we'll do archery, and then we'll talk about problem gambling or like mental health. But that once a year thing allows them to kind of get together. If you're going to do it separately, I'd say probably create some sort of youth council that represents all of your tribes. And you could call it the Urban Indian, Youth Council, and they can help provide you feedback on what they're seeing in their community. We have kind of something like that goes in and out. It's kind of hard to keep the kids once they come and then they graduate, but fentanyl, right, and opioids, it's kind of a big topic of conversation. And then homelessness right now are the things they've addressed with us. So it is hard to create that when you're dealing with great distance, but I would definitely say if you're a one-person show, it's harder to get out to the tribal sites, but I just highly recommend being able to go out regularly to help provide support, technical assistance, and offer any type of services that you can for satellite kind of style.
Great, thank you.
We have a question in the chat, and I really liked your comment that you can learn quite a bit from a denied application. So this question is, how do you obtain feedback from funders on denied applications? Do you need to request the feedback? Do most provide this? And is this a normal practice?
Yeah, great question. I would say that this is a normal practice. I would say that not most provide it, but you can request it. So if you send an email to the grant funder and you say we're a small urban program and we're very green in our grant writing, and I know we weren't awarded this, but it would really benefit us to see the areas in which we didn't, or see the areas in which we scored so we can work on this in the future. I don't know a single grant funder that would say no to that.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carrie Dallas. I'm zooming in from Tuba City, Arizona. I've gotten to work on a lot of grant programs, written some grants, and I'm just really glad that there are grants available that allow us to use our cultural traditional practices, and that the view now is that culture is medicine, culture is healing. How do we, and now that it's catching on across Indian country, the competitiveness of Indian organizations applying for these grants is increasing. More grant writers are becoming aware of how to, obtain these fundings. So how do we go about getting politically um, um, energized to ensure that there's this funding continues, that we get more of it, because now we're going to have programs growing that provide cultural, healing, cultural medicine. So that's my question is like, so there was a pool, now it's like everybody's gonna be aware of it. And so that pool is shrinking. And then, so how do we equate what is available out there to the need once, we get more grant writers that can write in that cultural content for this cultural healing?
Sure. Great question, Carrie. Well, one, there's never going to be enough money for what's needed, right? We all know that, and it's unfortunate. I think the real benefit that we should look at as tribal organizations and urban Indian programs is the partnership that you have with your tribal communities. If it's a strong one and you're writing these grants, right, then you're probably way better off than most of the tribal organizations for urban Indian programs. If you don't have as well of a footing in the community, the tribal communities that you're going to serve, that's one area that I highly recommend strengthening, because they can write a letter of support. And as a sovereign nation, that letter of support is seen as government to government. That's not seen as, like, oh, here's another county letter of support. I'm working with Multnomah County, and Grand Ronde tribe. No, it's seen as, wow, the Grand Ronde tribe is willing to work with NAR Northwest, and so is Multnomah County. So that'd be one area that I definitely recommend. The other area that I would recommend is taking advantage of the areas that they're wanting to highlight in change. So if this is a youth-based grant, finding something that is very is going to have a large reach, right? The larger the reach, the kind of greater outcomes and difference that you'll be able to make. Now, I warn those not to reach for like the stars and the moon and the heavens above, that you're going to promise all of this stuff and then not be able to do it. But I would say if you're able to provide a larger platform that's going to meet more youth, adults, elders, tribal community, that always looks good. And then, of course, one of the strongest pieces that I think people look to fund people is if their evaluation is going to provide high quality outcomes, and they can then take those reports and share them with funders that are higher up to say, look, the money is being used to change, deterrence to health or whatever. And so those are some areas that I would look at. And if you have a strong grant writer or you don't have a strong grant writer, I would recommend getting a strong grant writer. That's how you could increase your chances, I think. The urban Indian organizations.
I guess my statement and question kind of went in the wrong direction. What I'm talking about is, so I think if you don't say it, it's not heard, right? And I think out in the universe, we really need to start speaking this way as grant writers, as programs that use culture as healing, as medicine, that we need to really start getting politically active, aware of bills, aware of congressmen, aware of senators, aware of people who can make these appropriations to create more funding availability so that we can continue our work. The reason I'm asking that is because I'm on a board for one of our county boards it doesn't serve Native population, but they did want some input from a Native person. So they So yeah, so I'm that Native person. And so there's a lady on this board who is like constantly in the halls of the capital, in the capital city of this state. And she's always listening, has her ear to the floor, the walls, everywhere. You know, is this a bill we want to support? Is this something that we need to support? And so, I mean, like I said, you know, there's these grant appropriation fundings that are starting to come alive in CDC, NIH, all, you know, IHS, all these that can use culture. But eventually we're going to get so competitive that we need to ensure that there's funding will continue and that it will grow. So do you know of any political organizations in Indian country that might be doing this for our grants instead of just the few
Sure.
that might be existent right now? And so I'm saying that with all these people that are listening to this, we need to really get that political interest.
Yeah. I will say, because we're an urban Indian organization, we don't, you know, we have to ask the tribes first, right? Do they want to support the bill? So making sure that we're doing that, and then making sure that we have lobbyists and we have people that go out to speak at these bills. Each tribe does here in the state of Oregon. So I would say absolutely getting a letter of support written to your guys's congressman or congresswoman, and making sure that you're advocating with approval from your tribal partners is an issue. Is you know, legislation is constantly changing. We get leaders in and out of programs, and so being visible and being at those, even if you are the only Native person there, which they oftentimes then think you speak for all Native people, which we don't, right? And so being able to be that voice and say, well, what about the tribes, right? You guys are talking about all this money going places, but what about the tribes? So some people are champions of that as well. So find those people in your organizations that are well-versed in legislation, and allow them to take messages forward from your organization and your tribes.
So what you just said really is something that I hear often, is that, but like you look at the population of Native American, the population, if you know, when you really look at the measurements, a huge group of us live well, I live on the reservation right now, but the population that do live in the urban sites is huge, you know, so I'm just not sure. Okay, cool. Somebody wrote. Okay, it's probably time.
These are such great questions, and I wish we had a full hour and a half, but being mindful of other people's schedules, we're going to continue on and just wrap things up. So next slide, please. We did drop our evaluation survey into the chat. We would love for you to take a few minutes. You can grab it off the screen or use your smartphone and take a photo. We'll also send this out if you don't have time to complete it right now, but it does inform our programming moving ahead. And then last slide. And we have a number of great events coming up. All of these can be found on our website. So please take a few minutes to have a look, and we would love to see you in a further event. But before we go, I'd love for everyone to put a thank you emoji into the chat for Shane. He shared so many wonderful insights, and I think we could have spent the whole afternoon, you know, listening to his incredible knowledge and insights on grant writing. So with that, thank you everybody for joining today, and we hope to see you in a future event. Appreciate you all.